Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Unexpected Millennial. Drew Myers here with you again. Glad to have you with us for another conversation. This is one I'm really excited about, and I hope you really enjoy. It's the first time I have another guest with me and a conversation with my wonderful wife, Lindsay Myers, able to join me for a conversation today. One of what I hope will be many conversations between us and others we might be able to bring on, talking about millennial marriage, millennial family, and what it means to be a family and raise a family and to be married in today's society, how that might differentiate itself from previous generations. If you don't know the statistics, less than half of millennials from their mid 20s to their mid 30s are married. So we're actually in the minority as of 2019 to be a married couple as a millennial. So that is way, way down from the same age range from all previous generations before. So the question becomes, well, why is that? What are the factors that are meaning that less millennials at these ages from our mid 20s to our mid 30s are married than previous generations? Does it have to do with the dating climate that exists now in the 21st century? Does it have to do with financial constraints, student loan debt or workforce expectations among both partners that didn't need to happen before? Is it the economic status of our current situation? Or does it have to do with just waiting? Or what are all these things that could potentially be involved with why less millennials are married than previous generations? And how do we go about family life in the social media age and the different conversations therein? So I hope you'll join us for this conversation. I hope you'll really enjoy it. Lindsay and I really enjoyed sitting down and having this conversation. As I said, we hope it's one of many between the two of us and between others talking about marriage and family life and everyday life. If you haven't done so, please like this, subscribe to the channel, share the channel. We're trying to grow the conversation and just talk more about family life, about faith, about community, about service, and trying to become better individuals for our families, for our faith, and for our communities. So if you haven't done so, please check out those ways you can connect with us. If you want us to have some different conversations that you're interested, the unexpected millennial at gmail.com, the unexpected millennial at gmail.com is the best way to get a hold of us. Just drop us a line there with anything you'd like us to have a conversation about and cover some different subjects, and hope you'll be a part of this community moving forward. So I hope you enjoy this video as much as we did. See you soon. Millennial marriage and family life. Drew Myers here with you once again on the Unexpected Millennial, and I'm excited to be joined by my wonderful wife, Lindsay. She agreed to be on here with me after a little bit of convincing, but I know she's excited about having these conversations about marriage and millennial marriage specifically. We young folks in the millennial generation are facing different problems that previous generations didn't have, as every generation passing has different difficulties than the previous one as far as that's concerned. And we just want to talk about what makes the millennial generation a little bit different, trends among the millennial generation compared to previous generation, and look at some of the statistics and wonder why that might be the case as far as marriage and family life. And to be perfectly honest, we don't consider ourselves to be experts by any means. I don't think that, we're the couple who's been only married for less than 6 years and just had their first child born less than a year ago, and they have the whole marriage scene figured out. They have the life hack for marriage that, the previous millennia haven't discovered. We're not trying to say that by any means, but we just want to have conversation about marriage and family life because we know there's other folks who want to have those conversations as well, and just maybe it'll just open up some conversation as far as that goes. So I'll let Lindsay kind of explain what she does for a living because she can explain it better than I do. So
Yep. So I work for a bank. I started my career actually in a branch, working with customers, opening accounts, doing loans, all sorts of things like that. And had an opportunity recently to move to a back office because if you get to know my personality, I'm more of a behind the scenes person. So that worked perfectly for me. But I am currently a junior underwriter, so I work with unsecured loans, so credit cards, personal loans, and analyzing those, looking at all the different pieces and deciding whether people get money or not.
right, which is a wonderful place to work. It's been a blessing for us, and you've
Nice.
been there 5 years,
6.
almost 6 years.
Almost
That's right. It
6.
was as quickly after the marriage that you got
Yep.
that job. So it's been a blessing for us in many ways, and you've moved up the ladder since you've been there, which is a tremendous joy. In our marriage, it works really well that one of us is heavily involved in the church, obviously as a pastor, and you being heavily involved in the secular world. It seems to have been a good mix for us. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree.
It gives different perspectives, and if you don't know, I don't have information to back this up, but it seems anecdotally at least that a large percentage of clergy um, in a relationship, in a marriage, that both halves of the relationship are involved employee wise, occupation wise with the church compared to working outside of the church or not having work outside the home. So it just seems that having half of the spousal relationship that's outside the church seems to work well for us. Doesn't mean it'll work well for everybody, but works well for us. So that's a bit of our story as to where we're at right now. Our story is a different one as far as marriage goes because uh, we knew each other. We knew each other. Her father was my pastor at the time, so we knew each other in passing, but didn't really know each other well at all. I would say, and then eventually had our first date in October. We're officially dating in November. We're engaged the next July and married that October.
October.
So just about a year as far as between dating and marriage. So it was a very quick turnaround. And the first few years of our marriage, a lot of it was spent getting to know each other,
Yeah.
better as far as that goes. And we didn't want to rush into having a family because we still needed to get to know each other as husband and wife in
Yep.
many ways. So it was a different timeline for us than for many, a very short engagement, but one of those conversations that we both knew that this is where it was headed.
Definitely.
So I put it off longer than we needed to. So we'll get into that at some point in time. That's not for this discussion today. Today we're just kind of having a broad discussion about millennial marriage and family life. Just because as I was doing some research, I started to come up with statistics, and of course, statistics aren't everything. We always take them with a grain of salt because they can be morphed in different directions. But broad statistics show that millennials are getting married at much lower percentages than previous generations. We're the first generation from about 23 to 38-year-olds, give or take a year on either end as far as the research goes, that what most consider, the prime marrying ages. We are less likely by about 11% than Gen X was. And Gen X was down 5% from the boomers, and the boomers were down, almost 15 percentage points from the silent generation as far as that quote unquote mid 20s to mid 30s marrying age. And we are the first generation that in our age, from your mid 20s to your mid 30s, are you more likely to not be married than you are to be married? As of 2018, only 46% of millennials in that age range were married. So we, as a married couple, were actually in the minority as far as that concerned, and roughly only 30% with a child. So having gone into that group, we're even in the minority even further considered having a family. And when we look at those statistics and we hear that you're more likely to not be married than be married in your mid 20s to mid 30s as a millennial, what are your gut reactions? What are your gut thoughts, assumptions as to why that might be the case?
I mean, I guess the first reaction is I didn't realize it was that low that, below 50%, in our age group are getting married. Particularly, it seems like our first year of marriage, all we did was go to other weddings. But I think it's partly because, we're putting a more focus on education, or putting a bigger focus on career. We want that education. We want to do it earlier in life rather than later. We're more focused on getting our careers going and off the ground, as opposed to going out and dating and potentially getting married.
And there does seem to be some evidence to back that up in the fact that education numbers are going up. But the interesting thing about that is, and we'll get into that maybe more in another video, you're more likely to be married the more educated you are,
Huh.
which most would assume that it's not the
Yeah, it wouldn't be
case.
that.
But those with at least a bachelor's degree are the most likely to be married compared to persons who don't have a post high school education. So most assume that the more educated, because we're spending time, it takes years
Mhm.
to get to earn those degrees. So we would make the assumption that means you're less likely to be married, but actually the largest percentage of people who are married are bachelors and
Hmm.
up, which is really interesting. So we'll probably get into that at some point in time. Just in the question of wondering why that is the case as far as that goes, and marriage rates falling among persons who do not have a post high school degree of any kind, which is a really interesting
Hmm.
conversation. Another wonderment that I have, assumption that I have, is just the are millennials looking at it and just thinking, well, why do I need this? It's
Yeah.
just millennials, as most younger generations are, tend to go against institutions, and marriage is an institutional type of conversation. So are people our age just looking at marriage and saying, well, do I really need to do that? Does anybody need to know? Do I need to be married? Why can't I just live as a married couple
Yeah.
rather than officially be married?
Be married. Well, and I think in our generation, we're very intentional about what we do. There's generally a purpose for what we do. So if you don't see, a purpose for getting married, if you can't justify, why should we get married, I think that's part of why our generation isn't. They don't see a purpose for it. They don't see a need for it.
Yeah, and it seems to be that our generation, as others before, the trust of institutions is dropping.
Yeah.
And we've really seen that accelerate, I think, in the last 5 years, um, for many different reasons. And talking about the influence of the church dropping, but it's not just the church; it's just institutions in general. The trust seems
Yeah.
to really be waning, and that's marriage is a legal activity, so it would fall under that institutional type of umbrella.
Yeah.
So you wonder if that's the case. And something else we talked about was a theory that you had, and it's an interesting one, and we're trying to figure out how we can possibly look at it and figure it out if we can create correlations. And that is our generation looking at divorce rates from previous generations and reacting to them and saying, we've seen these generations have a 50-50 shot, that you're going to be
Yeah.
divorced. So why would I take that? Why would I take that 50-50 chance, and looking at it in that direction, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at it, something else. If there's, a risk reward and there's a 50-50 chance, marriage is great, but we also have seen, a lot of marriages end in divorce. I've got a 50-50 shot. Why not just, put marriage on the back burner, see how the relationship goes, and, if we want to get married, we can talk about that later. And
Yeah.
for the moment, I'm a little bit safer.
Yeah. It's just really interesting that the statistics show how tremendously the drop has been. I think that was the one that part of it that really caught me off guard. I wasn't surprised looking at millennials less likely to get married,
Yeah.
just because that seems to be, you look at previous generations, that's the trend, from silent generation onward.
Yeah.
It was just the fact that it's such a huge jump downward, and there has to be, maybe it's a melting pot of all of these things together. We're assuming that it's one driving force,
Yeah.
and it could just be a melting pot of all these different reasons, adding up over time. And then you have to throw social media into it. You have to throw the internet age into it.
Yeah.
You have to throw the temptation into it that comes with the internet crisis that we're in right now. And I do consider it a crisis because it is a tremendous addiction, that many millennials, myself included, can fall into. And does that online dating climate change things? And how does it change things? And how does that change marriage? And how does that change conversations? How does that change finding each other in the technology age compared to previous generations, when you it's hard to find somebody outside of your town, in previous generations compared to now you can see somebody across the planet in a moment's notice. And now with technology, you can, screen share with somebody from around the planet at any point in time. So you have to wonder what role technology plays in this conversation as well. So those are the type of things that we're gonna talk about on our marriage and family life sections here in a moment. We're gonna talk about expectations in marriage, and it seems that expectations in marriage kind of have a negative tone, and they can certainly be used in negative ways. We're going to talk about you know what it means to have expectations and healthy expectations going into a relationship, and how those might change over the course of a relationship as well. So hope you'll stick with us. Millennial marriage. What a wonderful time that we have talking about this. And we're going to talk about expectations in marriage. Doing, premarital counseling as a pastor is a joy of mine. It's something I really take seriously, and I really enjoy those conversations. But one part of that seems to have changed tremendously. Maybe it's not just the millennial generation, or maybe it's just the trend has continued, as many of these conversations have, that more and more millennials are living together before marriage, and not as roommates, but effectively as a married couple without being married. And I've had several couples that I've performed weddings for who were living together prior to marriage, and what it does is it changes my premarital counseling. A lot of my premarital counseling is talking about adjusting to life living together, because it's one of those conversations that it changes the relationship.
Yep.
You don't come back from it. Once you've lived with somebody, the relationship is never exactly the same as it was before, whether it's a friendship or a spouse, a significant other. It's not the same. And living with somebody isn't the same as enjoying spending time with them. It's a different conversation. So when I do premarital counseling, a lot of that conversation is about adjusting to life living together. But if the couple is coming in and already has been living together for a year, 2 years, they have a lot of those rhythms already worked out. Maybe there's stuff that I can help them iron out, and I do if I possibly can. But a lot of that stuff has already been ironed out. So a lot of what I talk about at that point is the concept of expectations of a spouse. Because while some might say that, just changing a title from a roommate to wife or husband doesn't change things, it does when you have that title attached to your name as a spouse at this point in time. And what expectations are you bringing into the marriage? What are your expectations for yourself? And what are your expectations for your spouse? And those can play a significant role when they're not communicated. Because if we go into a relationship and say a gentleman going into a relationship has a mom who fills the traditional role of a mother and a stay-at-home mom, and that's what he has in his head, you know, not saying not being misogynistic, but that's just the structure in which
Yeah, that was
he has
their
grown.
household choice.
Yeah, and that's the idea that he has in his head.
Mhm.
And if he doesn't communicate that well with his spouse, and he's assuming that she'll want to stay home and take care of the kids, and she comes in a relationship having lived in a home with a very independent parents, both working all the time, and she is fully expecting that she's going to work, outside the home as well, but she doesn't communicate that with him. There could be some significant tension in the relationship when that eventually comes up, because at some point obviously it's gonna come up. So I talk about those expectations, and it's just an interesting conversation because we all have expectations of a spouse, of what role a spouse is supposed to fill. And I asked Lindsay if we could sit down and talk about the expectations that we had for each other as spouses going into a relationship. And I think it might be a little bit different than many others. And we're not talking about I expect you to always put the seat down, or I expect you to help with the
That's a given.
dishes. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a given. But it's really more about personality and about the family, because we both knew going in a relationship, and that's one of mine as well. We're going to go back and forth going through our expectations. Um, it's about how we carry ourselves within the family. So I'm going to let you go ahead and start, Lindsay. I know you have a decent list
It's not
over
that
there.
long.
So
Do you want the original list or the
whatever
new
whatever you'd
list?
like, whatever you'd like.
Okay.
Well, yeah, definitely the new lists, and you can do both if you'd like to.
Okay. Well, you had mentioned that the expectations change. So before we were ever married, before we were ever dating, I just put together a short list of things that I wanted in a spouse. Faith, sense of humor, sees love as an action verb, not just something to be said. Family oriented, extremely supportive. Wants kids. Being able to cook was a plus. Those were just some of my short lists, but now that we've been married for almost 6 years, it's definitely changed a lot. So things like being supportive in the running of a household. I came from a household where both my parents, they did the dishes, they both cooked, they were equal in their running of a household. So talk about expectations. That's something that I expected Drew to help with, was doing laundry, cooking, be adventurous and willing to travel. I grew up traveling, going to different places, and I knew there
And
were
I didn't.
and I knew there were places that I wanted to travel and just to have those shared experiences with my spouse, with Drew. So that was definitely on my list. Support and be an active part in my faith, and not just be an active part, but go to church with me. Growing up in a pastoral family where both my parents did work in separate churches, I spent a lot of time sitting by myself in church. And it was something that I wanted to have my spouse in church with me so that we could share our faith together, and not just be something where I got up on Sunday morning or wherever and went to church by myself. Um, Also, I wanted my husband to support desires for my higher education. Um, I had just graduated from undergrad when we started dating, but also knew that I wanted a master's degree and wanted you to be supportive of that in my journey to obtain higher education. Um, I also wanted children, and we talked about were any of these deal breakers. Not wanting kids was a deal breaker for me. More importantly, to be open and honest with me, even if it was a difficult conversation or something that you didn't want to tell me, or that was really easy to tell me. I wanted you to always be open and honest and feel that you could come to me, whether it was a strength I had, a weakness I had, something that we needed to work on in our marriage. And then lastly, understand that I want to work full time. I grew up in a household where my mom did work full time, and that I want to have my own career. So those are mine.
Now you mentioned the not wanting kids to be a deal breaker. Are all of those deal breakers? Are some deal breakers and some aren't? And I know that's a little bit on the spot, but if that's seven characteristics, I think, would you say I fulfilled those?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Good job. High five.
Yeah. So going into a relationship, would any others besides the want to have children, what other ones would have been deal breakers, and why?
Faith would have been a deal breaker for me. Having kids, if I mean, I had to narrow it down to two. Having kids, because I've always wanted a family, I've always wanted kids. And faith would be deal breaker. I mean, faith was extremely important to me. It's a major part of who I am, even outside of being a pastor's kid. That was something that I was able to take on for myself outside of that. So, not being able to share my faith with my spouse, not being able, basically being alone in the relationship and faith, and always having to explain why I go to church, that was a huge part of me, and that was a part I wasn't willing to compromise on. All the other ones, I could compromise on. I could, stay at home mom. I'd be okay with that. But faith and wanting kids were the two I wouldn't compromise on.
And it is healthy to be able to articulate ones that aren't you're not willing to compromise
Mhm.
on, because if it's something that's that core to who you are and to the future you see, if you're allowing yourself to be in a committed relationship with somebody who doesn't have that vision for your family, it's going to be tense underneath the surface the entire time. And that has to be something you articulate together and you work together, because if you're just going to compromise on one of those core values, if you would have compromised and I said I don't want to have children, and you would have compromised in that moment, it would have always been a dark cloud over the relationship. And I think it's important for folks to understand that we do have to have those core parts of who we are and the family, the vision we have for our family. And it's okay to not have a relationship with somebody who's not filling those core values.
I mean, we talked early on, that was one of our big discussions when we knew that, we were headed quickly towards wanting to be married. We started having conversations, of those core conversations. Obviously, I knew, going into a pastor, your faith wasn't a question, and being able to sit in church, I would obviously understand if you weren't able to physically sit next to me in church. You have other duties on Sunday morning. Just a few. But talked about, what are our feelings about kids? We didn't necessarily talk specifics about how many, but we knew we both wanted a family. And that was one of those big discussions that moving forward, it was like, okay, we both want, that checks one of those non-negotiable ones off the list for me.
Right. Absolutely. And that's just vital to know. It's important to have yourself figured out as to what your core values are. To make sure that you're not compromising yourself just for the sake of being in a relationship, because that can happen. We all get caught up in that at different points in time. You get to feel lonely, you feel like you're missing out on the boat, and you can compromise your core values out of fear or loneliness, and that's a danger as well. But we want to make sure that folks are, your core belief shouldn't be something like, they'll paint my toenails for me every Sunday or something like that. There's obviously some core values that have more importance than other ones as far as that's concerned. Faith is obviously one of them. Money is another significant conversation. Usually faith, money, family, as far as wanting to have children, not wanting to have children, and career. Those are kind of the big four pillars of a marriage, and detail a lot of the success of the marriage from the beginning. Because if you don't believe in using money the same way, that's going to be a heavy tension. If one of you wants to have kids and the other one doesn't, that's going to be a heavy tension. If one of you is a believer and the other one is atheist, or a different faith, that's going to be a big tension. If one of you wants to stay home, the other one wants them to work, that's those are kind of the core that you have to understand. For me, a core is back scratching. That was
which I found out by accident.
That was a deal breaker. If she wouldn't scratch my back, that was a deal breaker. And early in a relationship, she saw me rubbing my back against a wall and came over and instinctively scratched my back. So at that point, I was smitten at that point in time. The rest of my list was done. Somewhat in jest, but that did happen. And I looked at Josh at that point in time, and he's just like, she gets it. Said, yeah. And she didn't even know it at that point. So some of my expectations, and I had fun sitting down and writing these out. And there are things that I knew in my heart and I knew in my mind, but I never made a physical list as far as that's concerned. So I enjoyed articulating them pretty well. And they're not in any particular order as far as that goes. And I know Lindsay's aren't in a particular order of ranking or anything like that. As you can see, one of her deal breakers is near the end of the list as far as that goes. So mine, emotionally and spiritually support me in whatever passions I have professionally and socially. So, just having a spouse that'll support me if I'm excited and come to you and say, hey, I'm thinking about starting this podcast and this vlog. I want you to be able to support me in that. But the next one goes along with that. Yet hold me accountable that whatever I'm pursuing aligns with Christian beliefs and morality. So it's not just being a cheerleader that I come to you and say, hey, I want to start this underground gambling ring in our basement because I think it'll make a bunch of money. And you just to go, woo, good job, babe, let's go for it. Yeah, that's not what I mean. Not just support me whatever it is, but hold me accountable in that support that, is this something that aligns with our vision of a family? Is this something that aligns with our Christian morality? Is this something that aligns with our ethical standards? And if it all does, then yes, I want and need that support and that passion. Doesn't mean you have to love it yourself, but support my
Yeah.
passion for it. Yet hold me accountable to the standards that we've set. So those two kind of go hand in hand as far as that's concerned. Hold me accountable to follow through with what I say I'll do and what I'll be for our family. So if I say I'm going to be this for you and for Elliot, if I say I'm going to do this for the family, for our structure to make us better, I want to be held accountable to that. That I'm not just throwing empty things at the wall and never following through with them. And of course, we all have projects that don't get done on the timeline that we first anticipate, but be able to lovingly hold me accountable and be like, hey, you said you do this. It's time to step through, and that was a big one for me as well. So, expectation for a spouse for me is to contribute to the family and the household success, whether that means working full time outside of the home, fully at home, or anywhere in between. So, essentially, helping the family structures to succeed. I always came into the relationship with the understanding that if you wanted to work full time outside the house, perfectly on board with that. If you would want to stay home and raise kids at home and not work outside the home, I'd be perfectly fine with that. Um, I always just, as long as you're contributing to the success of the family is what I want. So essentially, don't be lazy as far as that goes, because
Yeah.
you know having the calling to stay home and take care of the kids and
Yeah.
things of that nature is just as important as working outside of the home. We've had that disparaged in a lot of ways in society,
Yeah.
and I think that comes from couples who force their spouse to stay home. But if you have a spouse who wantingly and as a passion feels called to stay at home and raise the family, there is tremendous value to the success of the family and the development of the family for that. And not only financially, but socially, and as far as the family joining together and growing together makes a big thing as well. So as long as you are wanting and willing to help the family succeed in whatever passions you found yourself, that was one for me, certainly. um, the faith was a given for me. I just I couldn't I couldn't date somebody who was outside the faith. I didn't need to find somebody who I thought was even more deep involved than I was at that point in time, but I needed to have somebody who had a Christian grounding and understanding. So that one was just a given as far as that goes. Want to have children was on my list as well. I'd always wanted to have children. I went through a phase, as I think most men do at some point in time, of wondering, would I be capable of this? Would I be able to do this? And fear there, and thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't have kids because I just don't want to screw it up, essentially. So I went through that phase, as most men I think do at some point in time, but I quickly came out of it and discovered that yes, I really wanted to have children, wanted to have that next generation and be a part of that. I saw my brother and sister-in-law and my nieces and how joyful they are and wonderful family they are, and said, that's something I really do want. I really do want. So that was another one. My last one was it's very millennial. Um, Others might think it's ludicrous, but it was a serious one for me that I don't know if I ever shared with you.
More serious than basketball.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Um, Not overly focused on online presentation. That's a danger and a difficulty for us as millennials. And the irony is we're on social media right now, doing an online presentation of ourselves right now. But I don't use social media anywhere near as much as many millennials do. Neither of us do. We don't post that often. Most of the stuff I post is about the church and ministry related. And I it would be a deal breaker for me if every situation we were in, we had to take a picture, we had to post something online. Everything that we were doing was through the lens of the camera on our cell phones. and that's just something that I just couldn't have. It's something that I would constantly be upset about. I'd feel overwhelmed by. So that's one that I don't know if I did I ever share that with you.
I don't think so. I think it was just kind of understood that, we both have social media presence, but very rarely post. If we do, it's you're posting something about the church, or we're posting a picture of Elliot, or we're posting, family pictures from a vacation after we've come back. But we try very hard to be present with each other, to be present on vacation. Obviously, to take pictures because we want to share, but not to be in the moment having to take a picture and post it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's just something that, you know, it's a core of who I am to try to be in the moment as much as we possibly can. And that was just one that I couldn't see myself compromising on and being happy in that place. It would just constantly be a time of tension and a time of questioning, and that just wouldn't be healthy for either of us. So those are my expectations, and you have certainly met them all as far as that's concerned. And honestly, and maybe this makes me sound a little rigid, but all of them were deal breakers for me. I intentionally wrote a list of what would be considered my deal breakers, and if it was something I felt like I could compromise on, I didn't include it in these. But at the time that we got together, I was 25. I wasn't a kid anymore. I wasn't 18, 19, and dating with the hope that something might turn into something. I was at the point in my life where I knew what I was looking for in a future spouse, and I wasn't going to waste my time or anybody else's time, um, if I knew that it wasn't gonna, if I knew it wasn't leading in that direction, because I saw it as disrespectful to myself and to anybody else if I would entertain somebody else, knowing that this just isn't going to work. So at that point in my life, and in my mid 20s, I I didn't feel like it was fair to myself or to anybody else to even entertain the idea with somebody that I knew wasn't going to fit that vision of a family, um,
Yeah.
for me. So that was I went into it with that attitude, and maybe that's rigid. I just see it as I knew what I was looking for in a spouse, and I knew what would help us to succeed as a family. And I needed to have somebody who would align with that vision. And it just so happens that our visions seem
Aligned.
to
Yep.
align really well.
I mean, I
Um,
think that's part of why our relationship progressed. That we knew within a year that we wanted to get married, and we're married within a year because we both had expectations. We both knew, I mean, when I made my original list, I was, in my final year of undergrad, and it was, in my mid 20s. I wasn't, dating just to have, somebody, a significant other. I wanted a relationship. I wanted a partner in life. I wanted a spouse, and really sitting down. So I don't think yours was rigid. You just knew what you wanted and what to look for. And so I wouldn't call it rigid at all.
yeah, for I guess I've always framed it as respect for myself and for whomever,
Mhm.
um, the date or conversation would be with, because I didn't want to waste her time either. And
Yeah.
if I can look at her and say, it's not gonna work from the get go, that's way better than 6 months down the road, and having heavy feelings potentially involved. Going, I realize now that you know half of my core beliefs in my vision for my family, you don't share those, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's not mean, you know, you're less than me. It just means that we're not gonna,
Yeah.
it just means that we're not gonna work in that direction, and call that the spirit's guidance. And it's better to know that from the jump than 6 months down the
Mhm.
6 months down the line. But expectations in a relationship are interesting, and they're important because all of us are carrying expectations into a relationship. Whether we admit it out loud or not, anytime we're entering a relationship or a friendship,
Mhm.
we have expectations that are involved with them. When you're entering a friendship, you're expecting to have conversation back and forth. You're expecting to be able to spend time together. You're expecting to do different activities together. These are expectations that you have in your mind, and it's the same thing with a relationship. And you have to articulate and figure out what are those core things that make you you and provide you for a vision for your family, and share those with your significant other. You know, the biggest thing is you need to have that conversation. you, you can't let it be a couple years down the road after, you know, she has the expectation that you're going to take the trash out every time. And over the last 2 years, you've only taken the trash out half the time, and she's done it half the time. And that's been stewing underneath the surface for 2 years. And the first time it didn't matter, the second time it didn't matter. But after 2 years,
Yeah.
you know, that creates an explosion, or vice versa, whatever whatever it might be as far as the relationship goes. It can be those little things if they're not discussed. You know, one of the things that we talked about was cleaning the house and keeping the house up. And I never had any want or expectation that you would be the person solely responsible for cleaning the house. But I communicated to you that I enjoy dusting, and I don't mind doing dishes, but I despise vacuuming. I can't stand it. I really just don't. And though Lindsay doesn't exactly have a passion for,
Yeah, I don't mind it.
yeah, you don't mind it.
I don't mind it.
So, you know, we had that discussion and said, okay, well then I'm going to rely on you pretty heavily for doing this part of the cleaning, because I just despise it. And we all have those little things.
Mhm.
But, you know, it sounds tedious, and it is, it's trivial, but over 5 years,
Yeah.
those add up. If you're not communicating about them, if you're not having those conversations. And I think that's where the expectations really get us in trouble. You know, we had expectations, we held ourselves to our expectations, and because of that, it's led to almost successful 6 years in our relationship. But it's when you have expectations on either side and you're not communicating about them, and it just creates tension and just creates this black cloud that you might not even realize as the person who's not fulfilling the expectations. But you know, that's where we get ourselves in trouble. So those are our expectations that we had going into our relationship, and it was really fun to sit down and talk about this, especially looking at it compared to the list of characteristics that you had beforehand. And I would encourage sit down, if you are married, sit down with your spouse and talk about those expectations, and maybe talk about how they have changed. You know, if you've been married 5 years, 10 years, 15, 50 years. You know, when you've been married 50 years, your expectations for your spouse are a little bit different than they were as
Yeah.
newlyweds. I would assume so. You know, so it's healthy to continue to talk about those expectations, especially when you start to bring children into the family. So if you are married, I would encourage you to take some time with your spouse and sit down and talk about your expectations for each other and your expectations for yourself in the relationship. And if you are not in a relationship at this point in time, you need to sit down and know what those core parts of you are. You know, as a core tenet, your faith is a core tenet that you want children or don't want children. Is your core tenet a certain level of education or a certain job? You know, you have to figure out that core tenet, that core vision for your future and your family, and then have somebody who aligns with that, and not try to force the square peg into the round hole type of conversation. So, do you have anything else on expectations in marriage?
I don't think so. Other than, I mean, they change, and it's not a conversation you should be having once. Have it multiple times. Maybe not every year, but every couple years. I know I have grown into some of those expectations. I'm not a very domesticated person. Drew will be the first person to tell you that. But our roles have shifted. When I was in grad school, you did the bulk of the laundry, you did the bulk of the cooking, and I very much appreciate that. So now that I see all that work and I'm appreciative of it, it's made me want to step up more when you have meetings. How can I help you? Can I do laundry? Or you'll say, hey, I appreciate, if you throw in a load of laundry. So it's opened our communication lines too of how can we help each other.
Absolutely. Expectations can be negative. They can be very harmful, but they can also be tremendously blessing for relationships. So I encourage you to talk about them, to think about them, to pray about them, and hopefully you can have some good conversations. Our last conversation of this episode, as I said, we're planning to have more of these conversations moving forward, and hopefully we'll have other couples on with us as well, the other millennial couples or other couples of other generations that we talk about the different parts of being a young couple as the years have gone past and how has that changed and how has that developed. And I think that'd be a fun conversation, if we could convince your introverted father and my not so technology savvy father to be on. I think we'd have some fun with that
That'd be fun.
as well. Our last conversation today is just talking about a couple things that we see as unique challenges to millennials as far as marriage goes. As we said in the beginning, each relationship has its own unique conversations and challenges, and each generation has new challenges that they face as married couples, and our generation as millennials certainly falls into that category. And the first one that we're talking about is social media. I mean, it's everywhere. It's a part of everything. We're essentially the social media generation, as far as we're the generation that everything ramped up while we were
Yeah.
right in the prime age for social media. And where have you seen social media as far as appearance and presence and influence? Where have you seen it affecting millennial relationships as a whole, and then our relationship?
I mean, I think previously, like you said, having to document everything in the moment, whether it's on Instagram or it's on Facebook, or any other, social media platform, even if you're on vacation, you have to stop, you have to take pictures. That becomes, a burden to the relationship because you're focused more on putting on social media than being with your family, with your spouse. I think it's also impacted that appearances aren't everything. If you're struggling in your relationship, in your marriage, and you see Joe Schmo over there who's posting that, they just had this wonderful trip and they're, super happy, it can make you reflect on, well, am I really happy in my marriage? Why can't I have that? And I think that's a big part of how social media is being detrimental to our generation of marriages.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I mentioned was in my expectations was a spouse who wasn't overly, concerned with that
Mm-hmm.
because of that fact. And yeah, I think that image thing is the big one, right?
Yeah.
I think that's such a big one because especially now with, literally filters that you can literally make yourself look perfect.
Mm-hmm.
You can remove every imperfection literally on your
Yeah.
your face. You take a selfie and you can remove every blemish and things like that and make yourself look perfect of that nature. And you can always cultivate all the moments and make them look perfect, even more so than in previous generations. And I think that's played a big role as well. And I think something else is that social media has made us all feel like experts of everything.
Yeah.
It used to be that only an authority in a conversation or in a subject or in a particular line of education had a microphone, had a platform from
Mm-hmm.
which they could speak. And now literally everybody has a platform. And that's a good thing in some ways. It's a tremendous thing because there are a number of folks who, if it didn't exist, we wouldn't be able to sit here and have this conversation.
Yeah.
So it is a good thing overall that pretty much anybody can have a platform now online. But it also creates a danger of us as millennials feeling as though we suddenly are experts on anything and everything, and everybody has to know what we feel and what we think about everything. I think that's been a detriment as far as relationships go, that we have this inflated sense of entitlement that we think, oh, because I can, I should, which isn't always the case as far as
Yeah, I think it's also become a place to vent too. That if you have a problem, whether it's just in your life, professionally, in your marriage, you want to be heard because there's always going to be somebody who's going to comment on it. You immediately go to social media, and particularly in a marriage, if you do that instead of going to talk to your spouse, that's going to create a rift between you and your spouse, because you
Mm-hmm.
obviously care to share your problems more with the world than you do with the person who you're married to.
Well, yeah, I hadn't thought about that until you said that. That's a really good point because it creates an emotional crutch,
Mm-hmm.
and it distances yourself from your spouse emotionally, and it creates a the grass is greener type of scenario because you can emotionally connect with somebody else, or even with just the general concept of having an online diary, essentially. And you get those likes and you get those endorphins and you get that shot of adrenaline that goes with somebody comments or they like it or they love it, and that just feeds into your want to do that more, and it creates that cycle going on. I think that's a really good point as well. Social media is this such a strange thing. But it really is when we think about it. It's a strange, strange thing to want to put our lives out there at all times. Um, we're private people when it comes to most things, but even being a fairly private person, I feel pressured to put updates about us. I feel pressured to put updates about our son because we don't get a chance to go back home. We don't get a chance to see people as much
Yep.
as we want to, as much as we like to, and we have busy lives that are hour and a half away from family, and we just can't spend the time with those persons that we wish we could. And social media gives us a chance to have that connection, and I think that's a joyful thing. I do think it's a blessing, but it is a unique challenge that boomers didn't have to worry about. Silent generation certainly didn't have to worry
Mm-hmm.
about. Gen X starting to have that conversation early on with MySpace and things like that, but that was really really early as far as that goes. So it's a strange dance that we're trying to
Yeah.
navigate as millennials as to how much is right. You know, is is it right to just eliminate myself entirely, or is it right to have something on there? When am I going too far? And
Yeah.
maybe that's an interpersonal relationship
Yeah.
conversation more than a broad
I
conversation.
mean, I think it also can create false expectations.
Hmm.
If you meet somebody new, what's the first thing you do? You either, it used to be you Googled them, but now you go find them on Facebook and you look at all their pictures, and it may create positive impressions, or it may create, false impressions. If you see somebody with the picture doing this, and you talk to them about them and they have no idea, it can create both positive and negative connotations.
Absolutely. And with that, I think we have to consider cell phones as a whole,
Yeah.
because yet again, we're the generation that, we weren't the first generation of cell phones as far as that goes, but we are the generation that when we were in the prime areas, the prime age ranges as millennials, that's when smartphones were
Yeah.
becoming a thing, and we've seen them grow and progress, and the addiction to cell phones. What are your thoughts about that as far as how it impacts a relationship?
I mean, I think it's everything because you've seen people who they sit next to each other and they just scroll through their phones. And I mean we do it too, and we try to consciously say, okay, we're doing this, let's put it down. But I know particularly when we go to restaurants, my phone stays in my purse or it's flipped over next to the table, so that I can be fully present with you. Or if we're having a really important conversation, and I'm scrolling through Facebook, I'll say, hold on, give me a minute, let me put my phone down so I can be fully present. Um, so, we fall into that very millennial, but we try to catch ourselves. We try in important situations or important conversations, or even, not just important, but general conversations where I want to be fully present and let you know that you have my attention to put the phone down.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit overstated when members of previous generations say that millennials don't know how to talk. Just
Yeah.
because there's always been something like that.
Yeah.
There's always been something like that we could find that we could use as a way to not have conversation. There's always been something like that. Now, unfortunately, cell phones have accelerated that tremendously, and they do that way better than anything else because, you know, not everybody carried a newspaper around like now they carry a supercomputer in their pockets. Not everybody carried these things around that could distract us,
Yeah.
but weren't as prevalent. But now that we have smartphones and cell phones, they're so prevalent. I mean, it's uncommon for somebody, any older than probably 10 to not have a cell phone.
Yeah.
And having nieces around that age who want to have a cell phone, I understand that draw. And this is something that I really struggle with because I don't like idle hands. I don't like to not be doing something. So even when I'm quote unquote relaxing, I'm still piddling around on my cell phone, doing nothing essentially most of the time, but it's just mindless. And it's just feeding that addiction and feeding that cycle that we could be having a conversation about something. And we do try to do that. And I try to bring up random conversations, and I'll even start a conversation sometimes saying, you probably don't care about this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And most of the time, it does create some type of, at least a little conversation. But to me, it's better than sitting and scrolling or watching some random thing as far as that goes. And I know that's been something that's really I've struggled with.
Yeah, I think we both have, but it bugs me when you do, but I appreciate it because you'll look at me and go, so how's the Facebook? And that's kind of my cue that, okay, maybe I'm spending too much time or, there's other important things that I should just put it down. So as much as it annoys me, I appreciate it because it brings me back to reality that, hey, there's more things going on here than just scrolling through Facebook.
And it has, I mean, it has certainly negatively impacted how our generation has conversations. I mean, when I was in high school, it would be that if I was hanging out with a bunch of people before smartphones, we would be having conversation. We'd be talking about random stuff. Maybe we're watching TV and we're playing a video game, but we're talking about random stuff. And now when I go and I hang out with somebody, we're on our phones and not even fully there most of the time. Or we went to a wedding a number of months ago, and the first thing that I did, as well as pretty much everybody at the table, was take out your cell phone and put it on the table right beside you.
Yeah.
Didn't need to, but that's it's real common to see a table and then the cell phone's on. It's not even in the pocket. It's not even away. And I'm really scared about that addiction because that's what it is. It's an addiction, and I struggle with it as well. That if I don't have my cell phone on, I feel like my pocket's buzzing even though I don't even have it on me. And and sometimes I'll have music playing on my phone while I'm working out, and I'll look around, where's my phone? Well, duh, I'm playing music on it right there. But that's that need to have it in my hand at all times. And I can see that negatively impacting interpersonal communication. So I think that's something that millennials have had to deal with and try to navigate more so than previous generations as we try to figure that interpersonal communication out. And as far as advice from us would go, as far as these conversations would be, as far as social media goes, I mean, my advice is don't look at your entire life through the lens of social media. You don't have to document every single moment. You don't have to do that. Or if you want to document it for the two of you or the three of you, the four of you, that's cool. But not every single thing has to go online. It doesn't. And it'll be refreshing that you have some memories that are just for you and haven't been just under the public criticism at all time. Set time limits for yourself on Facebook. Set time limits on Instagram, on Twitter. And I know this sounds childish, but it's a big deal, and it can really improve those relationships and those conversations. And the cell phone one, if you find yourself sitting side by side on the couch with a significant other, with a spouse, and you're both just staring at your cell phones, maybe hold each other accountable and put it down and start an actual conversation. Maybe you start a conversation like I do. Hey, honey, you don't care about football at all, but I'm going to tell you about the Steelers game, and that's going to lead us somewhere to try to have those fully present conversations. Do you have any advice like that?
I would say just, be open. If you have that open line of communication and you sense that, your spouse is on Facebook too much or on social media, or be honest with yourself that if you find yourself, consistently scrolling and you feel like you're missing things, but also just be present. I love taking pictures, but at the same time, not everything has to go on Facebook. And I feel more fulfilled just being in the moment, enjoying things with Elliot, than scrolling through Facebook.
And it's important that when you have these conversations, do so from a place
Yeah.
of love and companionship, not from a place of how dare you do that, or would you put it down now? Because that just creates some vitriol. It's about, hey, you've been on your phone for a while. Maybe let's go for a walk, or
Yeah.
can we watch this show together? And not have cell phones, or can we watch a movie and put the cell phones away for the entirety of the movie and don't need to check anything, or
Yep.
watch this or read this together, have this conversation, and like you said, be open, but just approach it from a place of love and of grace. And it's a unique challenge that we all have to face, not just millennials, but all generations, face these challenges of smartphones and social media. And we just want your relationships to be healthy. We want you to grow as couples and as families. And I think that one of the best ways that you can is just be present with each other, be honest, right?
I agree.
All right.
100%.
Thank you, folks. This has been the Unexpected Millennial. Thank you to Lindsay for joining me for this
You're
conversation. I've
welcome.
greatly enjoyed it, and I know it was a broad conversation today, and we'll probably get into more specifics at the next episode and talk more scriptural about relationships and things of that nature. But we wanted to get into some broad concepts, so I hope you've enjoyed it. Please take some time to like, share, and subscribe the Unexpected Millennial.
Thank
Share
you.
this video and be part of this community. So, see you soon. Thanks for sticking around and checking out this video. I appreciate you very much. And as I said, get a hold of me, different subjects you'd like me to delve into, whether they're scriptural related and looking at more Bible study format, or their conversations like this about trends among the church and outside the church, or social conversations, however you'd like me to get into. Please drop me a line and with some suggestions. theunexpectedmillennial@gmail.com. Hopefully I'll have that on the screen in front of you. But yeah, let me know what you'd like to hear from me at, and just keep supporting, and appreciate you much. Have a good one.